This is what revolution looks like: violent, unpredictable, but it is also hopeful and a gateway to change. The Iranian Revolution began under the Pahlavi dynasty. Tensions started worsening under the reign of Mohammad Reza Shah, the king of Iran. After World War II, Mohammad Reza Shah made several attempts to westernize Iran like the government did in Turkey. This movement was called the White Revolution. Under this period of reform, education significantly improved, infant mortality alleviated, and Iran became increasingly secular. However, the Shah's regime was riddled with corruption, with him refusing to nationalize oil and working with the United States to sell Iranian oil to other foreign powers.
I'm Nikki and this is Jolie. What's your name?
Shipa?
Okay, we're going to ask you a couple questions about your experience in the Iranian Revolution.
Sure.
Okay. Can you explain the state economically and politically that Iran was in before the time of the revolution?
Before the time of revolution, economically, Iran was going through a period of having a lot of money because of the oil prices going up. So there was a large middle class that got a lot of money in their hand, also an upper class that was built in Iran. Unfortunately, that was not sustainable as there was no real manufacturing or any kind of economic system in Iran. Inflation happened, so the economy started getting deteriorated. And politically, though, Iran tried to modernize on some personal freedoms, but when it came to political freedom, it never did that bridge. So as a result, there was no political parties that were active, neither was freedom of speech or press in Iran.
And how did people feel about this Shah?
At the time when the economy started disintegrating and coupled that with the censorship and the lack of any kind of political freedom in Iran, where people could not express their frustration and they were upset about their economic situation, made people starting to hate the regime as a result of that demonstrations.
And there's a very controversial topic about how the Shah brought modernization. I mean, this Shah was put in by the U.S. practically. It was most like a puppet for the oil, and a lot of people say that, a lot of Americans believe that he was bringing westernization and modernization, and Iranians didn't like that, especially the religious class.
Well, when we talk about Iranian, we have to be careful. There is a fraction of ultra-religious people in Iran, led by a lot of institutional religious groups, that obviously did not like the modernization that happened during Shah time because they felt threatened by it. They didn't want a secular government. They wanted more powerful religion. But as talking about people in general, people actually welcomed the modernization. It was good for women, especially because they got to go to universities, get jobs, get voting rights, and also for families, because now they had two people earning money in the family rather than one. So people did not necessarily have issue with the modernization. It was more with the dictatorship, lack of freedom, and then at the end it was because of an economic system that was not sustainable.
Tehran, Iran's capital, was in a state of revolt on January 19, 1979. The Shah, Iran's ruler for nearly 4 decades, had fled the country. Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini, a Muslim Shiite cleric, returned, replacing Iran's secular government with a theocracy ruled by Islamic religious leaders, changing the country's name and identity to the Islamic Republic of Iran.
Hi, how are you? What's your name?
I'm Rami.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Now, after the fall of the Shah, there was a new regime where Iran became the Islamic Republic of Iran under the new rule of Ayatollah Khomeini. How did Khomeini come to power?
So Khomeini was a religious opposition leader for quite a while, and during the revolution there were many different, it was basically a spectrum of different political forces, and Khomeini had the widest organization, the mosque and stuff, and the other groups from leftists, Marxist groups to nationalists to moderates, they were all under oppression. They didn't have a good organization. Their leaders were in jail, and as the leaders were being released from jail under pressure from especially Jimmy Carter, President Carter's human rights pressure on Iran Shah. So as they were being released, they're starting to grow really fast, all of these groups. And their demonstrations started in few hundred in universities, and now they could demonstrate like 50,000, 100,000 people in each demonstration. So they were growing fast. And then there were some negotiations happened, the brokering from between some Western countries, the leader of army, and some representative from Khomeini to transfer this power because they didn't want all these leftist groups.
So the thought that Khomeini was the only candidate is a lie. There was other groups, they were just repressed.
Exactly. There were other groups and they were gaining the upper hand during the revolution, and that's not what a lot of people wanted to happen. And they thought Khomeini is a safer bet because especially that he was anti-communist and there was the Soviet Union right north of the Iran neighbors, and so they thought it's safer.
So it was
Now, this is a question that comes up in almost every conversation about the Iranian Revolution. Would you say Iran was better off under the rule of the Shah or Khomeini?
I would say neither, but basically it's hard to compare the two. These are just two different periods of history.
Tensions between the U.S. and Iran culminated in the hostage crisis when a group of Iranian students took 66 Americans hostage for 14 months in an effort to retrieve their Shah. However, since the Shah died, there was a vacuum of power, which Khomeini took advantage of and assumed power as the supreme ruler of the Islamic Republic of Iran. The supreme ruler was a Sharia law scholar who ruled with the president, prime minister, and legislator, but the supreme ruler had the power to veto anything. Despite being based in Islam, violence and chaos diffused across the country.
Okay, so can you ask him for me what type of discrimination Iranians had to face in the U.S. during the time of the hostage crisis?
تو وقت که هاست کرایسیس تو ایران بود اتفاق به ایرانیا اینجا چجوری بود؟
چه اتفاقی براشون افتاد؟ بیشتر
Most of the discrimination and prejudice was evident in conservative states. But in California, where we were, we mostly just heard stories of the abuse. What we mostly had to endure here was the INS checking anyone who even remotely looked Iranian. They would check people's visas in hopes that they could send them back if they were from Iran.
ویزاشون رو چک میکردن که اگر ویزا نداشتن یا ویزاشون چیز بود و در اون دوره خیلی از زمانی هم که این اتفاق افتاد درست امتحان نهایی بود و همه داشتن امتحان میدادن و خیلی دیسترب کرد. مثلا خود من خیلی دیسترب شدم، مجبور شدم یه دونه کورسم رو دراپ کنم. مثلا بعد
This began happening exactly around the time of finals and testing for students, and therefore it caused a huge disturbance among this particular group of people. I had much difficulty keeping up. My friends in Alabama and other conservative states would tell me that Iranian students were being killed. People would approach Iranian-looking people and ask them, "Where are you from?" And they would say, "I'm Persian." An interesting story, actually. My friend once told me that he was in a bar when this man came up to him and asked, "Where are you from?" And he said, "I'm Persian." And the man told him, "Good thing. If you were Iranian, I would have killed you." How would you say the revolution affected you personally?
It affected many people in Iran in a personal level, but for me and my family was about the fact that after the revolution, when Khomeini came into power, so did a lot of dictatorship and our opposition to the new government, and it ultimately caused me, when I was pregnant, to be arrested by the Revolutionary Guard. And you know, the short of the story is we flee the country illegally and had to endure a lot with a little child on our hand in order to come to the United States ultimately and stay in this country.
And we know you have a very interesting story and experience during this time, and I've heard you kind of had a bit of a run-in with Khomeini's regime at that time. Was that the time that you were put in jail?
Yeah, so in 1980, after we finished high school, they closed down all the universities and they called it a cultural revolution. All the universities were closed, so we could not go to university. And then I was involved with some democratic movement, some books and magazines, and because of the magazines I was arrested and then taken to the infamous Evin prison in Tehran and kept there for about 4 years, repeatedly asking me to denounce, come to behind the camera, TV, and denounce the opposition, which I didn't do that, but eventually I was able to get out.
Oh my God.
So are there any stories, personal stories you might want to let us know about?
میشه شد که میخوای به ما بگی که پرسنال.
آره موقعی که شیپا مثلا 6 ماه حامله بود، موقعی که با هم گرفتنمون به خاطر که دوره های دبیرستان شیپا که اعلامیه پخش میکرد و اینا میدونستن که این اعلامیه پخش میکنه، یه دفعه اومدن گرفتن تو خیابون. شیپا هم 6 ماه حامله بود.
During the time, my wife Shipa was 6 months pregnant, and they arrested us both. She at the time was in high school, and we were both revolutionaries, but she was very well known for handing out revolutionary material, which is easier to get caught for, and they knew she did it. And they arrested her in the street at 6 months pregnant. They took us both to the committee. We were in a prison cell, and we were sitting on opposite sides, and we were looking into each other's eyes. Only 7 months had we been married, and we were both thinking, it's all over. And we appreciated at that moment that we were living and we were fighting for the democracy of our country. That was important to us. I will never forget that day. Anyone who went into the committee never came out. They were often sent to Evin prison, the worst prison in Iran. And Shipa being pregnant killed me. For her to go to prison and have to have the child there, I wouldn't be able to live with that. And so we organized our story, and we were smart about it. And we were there for a couple days. And finally, we said that Shipa was going to have a miscarriage if they didn't let us go to the hospital. And so we were allowed to go to the hospital, but from there, we went into hiding. Once my son was born, we were taken on a boat to Pakistan. I'll never forget this journey. From there, we went to Germany. The trip from Iran to West Germany had so many problems, experiences, and finally, with much difficulty, we reached West Germany. Once we were there, since I had had a student visa to the US, I was able to find a way to apply for political asylum in the US. And so after 2 years, we came here.
مثلا پناهندگی سیاسی بگیرم، اسایلم بگیرم برای پلیتیکال ویزا. این